And that jarring cacophony tells you you're back with the Power of Three podcast, the Scottish Doctor Who podcast that loves its books. And indeed we love the Seventh Doctor, the first of our favourite Time Lords to hail from north of the border. Sylvester McCoy, just in case you wondered. I'm Kenny Smith, I'm not Sylvester McCoy, but today we're going to be taking a look at Matrix, which was the 16th novel in the BBC Past Doctor Adventure series. It was written by Robert Perry and Mike Tucker and released on the 5th of October 1998, featuring the 7th Doctor Ace and the Valyard. And according to TARDIS Fandom, they note that it also features alternate versions of Ian Chesterton and Barbara Wright. So let's have a look at the cover. It's a Sylvester McCoy picture from Ghostlight, where he's not got his hat on, and surrounding him are some police box frontages. Yes, it's that popular shot that they used for Black Sheep books, and it's the TARDIS from the Tom Baker titles. Yep. Anyway, as we flip the book over, I won't fight you. Oh, but you will. The voice twisted and cracked. Fury and madness tore through it. You will fight me, Doctor. The Doctor is on the run from a faceless enemy that knows his every thought and move. He flees to his past, planning to leave Ace in safe hands in order to fight on alone. But his enemy has other plans, and the Doctor's history no longer exists. The TARDIS is finally drawn to London in the winter of 1888, where the Doctor and Ace discover a dark secret from Gallifrey's past and the name of their unseen opponent. It is Jack the Ripper. That's not a bad setup at all, is it? From the team that had previously brought us Illegal Alien, which we featured quite recently here on the Power of Three. Now we're going to kick off with an excerpt from pretty much the start of the book, actually, and it's going to be read for us now by our pal David Steele.
All that is outside, all that walls are supposed to keep outside, was here focused. Concentrated, entombed in stone and iron. Through endless stone passageways the silence was audible, the stillness somehow tangible. The occasional stagnant pool of dull yellow light, seeping from sources unseen, was lanced with murdering shadows. Shadows that flickered with eerie half-life, voices ringing like whale song. In one tiny room, a figure was huddled over an old roll-top desk, trying to shut out the cries in the dark. The room was a clutter of archaic scientific instruments. Theodolite, sextant, an old brass microscope, a huge floor-mounted compass, all dusty from disuse. The walls were practically invisible beneath mounds of books, hundreds, probably thousands of ancient volumes which hadn't moved for years. The figure was working. The only signs of movement were his hands moving quickly and precisely. The rest of his body remained still. His eyes stared from beneath a dull black cowl, unblinking, never straying from the work in front of him. He was juggling, twisting, scratching at a lump of clay, vaguely manlike in shape, his long nails gouging out lines and hollows, the clay peeling off in lumps and falling unregarded onto the desk and floor. He made no mistakes. There was no hesitation in his movements. It was as if he had been programmed for this task, and slowly a figure was emerging from the clay. Not human, barely even humanoid, a bizarre anatomical jigsaw. Huge rough head, bulbous fish eyes, enlarged arms ending in bony clawed stumps, short squat legs, web-like feet. It was more than just ugly. It was a distillation of pure, destructive malice in miniature. The hideous toy appeared to afford no pleasure, no pain, nothing to its creator. His face, deep in shadow, was impassive, almost unaware, as if his concentration was focused not on his task, but somehow beyond it. It was finished. The little beast was complete. The man rose from his chair and swept into the corridor, disappearing into its prehistoric vertebral shadows. Somewhere, deeper in the labyrinth, he came to a set of huge double doors wrought from hammered metal. At his silent approach they swung open, with no creak or clang or apparent propelling force, as noiseless as his spectral footfall. Beyond the doors was an immense spider's web of Gothic architecture, pillars, screens and high-vaulted ceilings, grinning carved faces distorted by flickering braziers, all woven in intricate, continually unfolding patterns of light, shade and stone, leading with many a twist and turn to a huge central nave. Here, the mad cathedral architecture of the complex was more concentrated, more oppressive, more threatening than anywhere else. The other rooms and corridors were just tributaries, stray strands far from the arachnid nerve centre. Here the weave was strongest. Here some ghastly, predatory spider power was concentrated. The very walls were intense, magnetic, like some fairground maze of mirrors, forcing energy continually back to the crucial central point. Like a shadow, the hooded figure was suddenly snatched into the lattice of darkness, at once invisible, momentarily arcing across a shaft of light from somewhere high above this elegant, primal generator. He walked with unchanged, mute, blind assurance through the stone circuitry to the nave. There he stopped, lowering his head for a moment, then placed a clay mannequin on the floor. It sat at the centre of an array of lines and figures, circles within circles, and a huge pentagram which radiated out into shadows. For the first time, the man appeared to tense, throwing his head back and his arms wide. He looked slowly around him, his eyes burning into the dark cloisters, his lips drawn back over tightly clenched teeth. He sang, low at first, deep, quiet, rumbling, blending with the lost anguished cries of the shadows. Then, gaining in confidence, volume, sneaking up the register, wordless, sweet, almost ashamed. His voice died. Silence. The emptiness swallowed his words. He stood, his arms still outstretched, waiting. With the gentlest dilation of liquid stillness, the shadows appeared to bulge and break, giving birth to new forms. Solid, almost. If they had any colour at all, it was grey, fading to black. This was no illusion, no trick of some devilish master builder. The soulless hunger of this place had found physical, mobile, living expression in these children of shadow, looming around the cloaked mentor. Called by the sweet, desperate promise of the song, they seemed to ripple with the darkness, sparking with sudden quick infusions of bright necromantic energy as they passed across the strident gold symbols which gashed the floor. They formed a ring around him, the one who had called them. 12 in all, waiting. He brought his hands together, as if in prayer. His eyes snapped shut, his lips began to tremble, to twitch. Finally, to shape the words of a new song, a circular incantation, at first inaudibly, internally, then with each sweep of the cycle, a little louder, again, again, again. His ghost coven began to hiss, to inhale and spit back his words, tunelessly, voicelessly, like wind among dead trees. Louder and louder, feeding the sound-swallowing cloisters, louder, until finally those cloisters became full and began to regurgitate the dread litany, the very building lending its voice, spilling sound back at them from its dark recesses, a hysterical wall of echoes, out of time, finding strange rhythms of their own. The cloaked mentor stopped. He began to recite now, slowly, his words lost beneath the maelstrom he had made. He dropped to his knees before the clay statuette, imploring, charging with desire. He pointed a pale, bony finger at one of the coven, who let out a voiceless, hissing wail. The shadows closed around the one he had chosen, pushing him forward, pushing him towards the clay figurine. Spectral hands clutched and clawed at the stonework, fighting to be spared this. The very essence of the one he had chosen, ghost essence that it was, seemed to be sucked, distorted, drawn into the figure like water into a gully. Gradually, slipping away beneath the raging sea of sound, the clay figure faded and was gone.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Ravy Davy Gravy, and he will be back with us later on. Now we're going to have our first interview of the day, and we're going to hear from the man who commissioned the book. It's the range editor at the time. Here he is.
Hello, I am Steve Cole, and I edited Matrix by Mike Tucker and Robert Perry.
The thing that struck me at the time was how Matrix did the thing that Virgin Books had said no to pretty much. Stay away from the Valyard. Beware the Valyard.
Yes, and so because they said that made me think, well, why should we? Let's go check out the Valyard. I didn't see any reason why not. So it was, I thought that the premise for Matrix was fun. I knew that Mike really wanted to do it. And after Illegal Alien had been a lot of fun to work on, I was happy to give them a go with it. What was interesting with Matrix was that I remember when Robert and Mike submitted the first draft, I was able to tell them to the page when they had started writing the version after the initial opening, which clearly had been submitted to Virgin many years earlier. And then, because that had been rejected, they hadn't written any more, and so they picked it up. Because the difference in style was huge, because it was Matrix. When they were writing it first time round, they hadn't had anything professionally published. They hadn't learned what they learned writing Illegal Alien. And it was, there was a big jump in style, and suddenly it came into focus, and it became something much more interesting and elegant. So they went back and rewrote the first big chunk to keep it in line with what followed, and I thought it worked very well. It was all the stuff with Ace and the animal cage and the dark stuff going on there, of flavour of Deadly Assassin, slight flavour of Trial, and all sorts of good Elephant Man, Victorian cruelty going on as well, made it quite a rich thing.
I think the setting is just perfect. It feels similar to Ghostlight, but obviously it's set outside, and you've got terror looking around the corner. I mean, for me, Dominic Glynn's terror version is playing throughout as you're going through those streets.
Yes, I can imagine that. It actually feels like, if Ghostlight is the studio version, then you go into OB for Matrix, probably made by, the same crew, but the other 3 episodes being made outside. I did like that. And I think when your authors are really passionate about doing something and they've been denied it before, it was, they really made the most of that opportunity, and came up with a very enjoyable novel.
And they're really, really starting to push against what Virgin had done, and just to prove this was a completely different lining, going off to do its own thing.
That's right. Well, they wanted to do their take on season 27, which did take it in a different direction, and of course that made perfect sense to me. You don't want to do what's been done before or follow necessarily the Virgin path, without question. So there's all sorts of other ways you can go about it. Other ways you can look at Doctor Who. And since Mike had worked on the show and knew Sophie really well, and since he and Rob had been working on little projects together since they were at school together, they brought a lot of the past with them, more than enough to push Doctor Who into that slight alternative future post-survival.
I do wonder whatever happened to that other guy they used to work on projects for when they were back in Wales, that Stephen Russell Davis guy.
Yeah, what did happen to him?
Maybe fell in the sea.
He probably did.
Yeah, no idea. Oh well, he must be a footnote in the history of the show somewhere.
That would fit him to a T.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve.
Great pleasure.
Thank you, as ever, to Steve. If he's ever signing one of his own books near you, please do go along and see him. Recommended. Lovely man, genuinely one of life's good guys, and I always love chatting with him, so he'll be back with us again very, very soon, I'm sure. But now let's move on to the main event. Let's speak to one of the co-writers of the book. We'll let him introduce himself, shall we?
I'm Mike Tucker, and I was the co-author of Matrix.
So Mike, we'd had a success with Illegal Alien, great reviews, so was it pretty quickly after that was commissioned, that this one was commissioned?
Yeah, I mean, Steve Cole was my editor at this point. Nuala Buffini had moved on from the range. Steve had been my sort of hands-on editor for Illegal Alien, or our hands-on editor for Illegal Alien. And he said, yep, we're very happy. We'd like you and Robert to pitch something else. And we did pitch a couple of stories at him. All of which got thrown back at us. None of this is working. None of this is what we're after. So Robert and I went, well, we'll pitch Matrix then, because Matrix had been a story that we'd actually written quite a long time previously, or storylined quite a long time previously, and had pitched it at Rebecca Levine at Virgin Books, who had sent it back to us with a note saying, "This is unpublishable." It's effectively fanwag, if I can use that term. So anyway, we sent the same manuscript to Steve, and he went, "This is perfect. This is exactly what we're after. It's epic, it's big, it's dramatic, it's emotional. It's got a great arc for Ace. It's got a great arc for the Doctor. It's exactly what we want as the follow-up to Legal Alien. Go away and do it." So we'd gone from being, "Oh my God, this is unpublishable," to, "Yeah, please do it." And so, yeah, it really was, off you go.
That's amazing. It just goes to show that, just like Illegal Alien, you should never throw out your old ideas. They'll always work for someone.
No, never throw anything away. Never throw anything away.
It's quite a dark book. We can say, I think it's fair to say that. It's,
Yes.
given how light in places Illegal Alien was, and an awful lot of the humour, and this has very much got a darker humour to it, but it's grim. I mean, anything with Jack the Ripper isn't
grim.
going to be a laugh a minute chuckle.
Yeah. So yes, it starts with this introspective, brooding Doctor by the sea. You then have a sea monster attack, because you've got to have a sea monster attack, because Doctor Who is all about sea monsters, as far as I'm concerned, when it's at its best. And then, yeah, it goes to an alternative Earth where, the Doctor is trying to ground himself, which is Ian and Barbara, in this world where they're married, but the Ripper, murders never stopped, and this cult, and it just spirals into a lot of different directions. Very, very influenced by Robert, this one. Robert's Victorian research and his things like the circus owner and Jed are Robert firing on all cylinders. I'm writing more of the action adventure stuff within this particular story. And then, of course, we throw in that moment where the Ripper and the Doctor have this conversation. He goes, or as you know me, the Valeyard. And mwahaha. So again, we really, really were doing what fan fiction was doing. I think we did it well. There were certain key moments that I always knew had to somehow come into this story, and Robert and I talked about, the 12 ghostly TARDISes and the Doctor suddenly turning on Ace and trying to kill her, and her going, "Okay, if this is the way I'm going out, we're both going out," and pulling the pin on our nitro. There were very key moments that we knew we wanted. And as you say, we put Ace through the absolute ringer in this one. But I was very pleased with it. I mean, it's for what is one of our very earliest pieces of prose writing, even though it's not published first, I think it is quite accomplished. The entire sequence that I have with Ian and Barbara talking to each other the day after the Doctor has left, and that was one of the first things I ever wrote in prose, and I can remember giving it to Mark Platt to read, and he was very complimentary, gave a lot of good notes to improve it, and that basically ends up in the book virtually unchanged. So there's lots that I'm very, very pleased of with Matrix. I'm still slightly astounded we were allowed to get away with what we did, to be honest.
And I think that the thing that always got me at the time was the fact you've got that alternate timeline, which is something that the New Adventures had done sort of briefly with 5 novels in the alternative universe cycle, but because we went into this sort of divergent timeline, it was still something that wasn't that common in books, and still isn't really to this day.
Yeah, I mean, when we wrote it, it was written as an anniversary story. I'm not quite sure which anniversary it would have been. I'm assuming 30th. But I there were things that I just wanted to play with. I mean, I'd come off the back of working with Sylvester and Sophie. We'd got through that final season. We'd done things like Ghostlight and Fenric. You could see where the show was going to go. And then the Virgin New Adventures very much went off in their own direction. And Matrix was from a slightly more innocent earlier time than what the New Adventures were doing. And so I can see why Rebecca rejected it, because it didn't fit what she and Peter Darvill Evans were doing with the New Adventures. But when BBC Books effectively pressed a big reset button, we had a new opportunity to go back and tell these stories again. So Illegal Alien, to my mind, was set directly after Survival, and Matrix is set directly after Illegal Alien. So I'm not referencing anything that the Virgin Books did. I mean, I'm not denigrating it. I'm just saying we're not referencing it. That's the Virgin Books universe. Mm-hmm. This is the BBC Books universe. And our two stories take place directly after Survival. And that continued with Storm Harvest, with Primetime, with Loving the Alien. This was us doing our continuation of what Sophie and Sylvester's Doctor were doing. The Seventh Doctor and Ace finished on screen here and then went into the books here. And I think it's only Heritage that breaks into our cycle of where things come.
Yeah. I think that even the Hollow Men, I don't think it sort of breaks in there. It could be set before Survival.
Yeah.
I think you're right there.
So that's right. I think Hollow Men is set before Survival, whereas ours are all set after.
Yeah.
And it's only Heritage that breaks that chunk.
Yeah.
So it's quite refreshing, quite freeing for Robert and I, just to be able to sort of not have to think about Virgin continuity or comic strip continuity or TV comic continuity or Big Finish continuity. This was BBC Books. I think it was Lawrence Miles who came up with the concept that all these bottle universes exist sort of concurrently with each other. There's the TV one, the Virgin one, the TV comic one, the Marvel comic one, and they all float around and intersect occasionally, but they are actually separate, which I think is the only way you can actually deal with it, because if you try and actually make a through line run through everything and make it all make sense, you go mad.
Yeah. I have to admit, in my younger days, I did try that and just sort of like, do you know what? It doesn't fit. Don't waste your time. There are better things to spend time and energy on.
Yeah. So the freedom of don't worry about that was very good from Steve. That was a great steer. So it allowed us to do our Valeyard story. And I know that that's a contentious character, but you've been given this hint in the TV series that he's the dark version of the Doctor that exists here. And Jack the Ripper was a perfect version of the Valeyard. And Alan Barnes actually suggested that Robert and I did the Jack the Ripper walk. So we went into central London, met up with one of these tour guides who walked us through all the various places. So all of the settings within Matrix are actually based on the actual Ripper locations. We had a very, very good time sort of going through all that and working out where everything was set. And it's also a huge learning curve in that, it's the first time that Robert and I had written something that's set quite so far in the past. And you suddenly realize that I know nothing about life in Victorian London. How much was a pint of beer or a loaf of bread? Where did you go? Could you just book into a hotel? And you suddenly realize that when you write present day or future, you can make all this stuff up. When you write Victorian, I have to research it now. And that took an awful lot of time researching it to make sure that it felt authentic.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading those bits, I could hear Dominic Glynn's terror version of the theme playing.
Yeah,
it's just got that kind of Victorian shadowy streets, and that was sort of, when I was reading it, that's what was in my head. So it absolutely sort of, that helped set the tune and just pull it all together.
Yeah, and and it's all night and wet, and we spent an awful lot of time round Clink Street and that bit of London, sitting in London pubs in ancient sort of smoke-blackened London pubs, Robert and I talking through this stuff, and well, we could do this, and 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 it does work very well. I'm very pleased with it.
I think the contrast between the Seventh Doctor and the Valeyard is fantastic, because obviously we'd seen Colin do it on screen before in Trial, but I think having this more devious and just more plotting Doctor who can sort of playing a game against himself and he wins, and I think it was a great mix-up or match-up, I should say.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to deny Robert and I are sort of throwing sort of some very broad horror tropes in there, even down to the Valeyard standing on a church top holding aloft a piece of metal that gets struck by lightning,
But that's the stuff we recognise. I mean, Doctor Who fans are media literate.
Yeah, and the fact that the Doctor is forced to say goodbye to him as he dies and call him Doctor, acknowledge him. There's a lot of stuff in there that it's quite broad strokes. But I don't think that's a bad thing. Occasionally, I think you're occasionally forced back from being quite so in your face with some of these things, and Steve encouraged us. He said, go with it, do it, make it this big, broad Victorian melodrama and epic. Make it epic, and that encouragement allowed us to be a little bit fearless with it. I think it's weird, and you're in a world that's sort of, if not pre-internet, certainly early days of the internet, and you do wonder what it would have been like as an experience if you'd had fan groups and people criticizing you or pushing you or saying what you should have done or shouldn't have done. But we didn't. We were just allowed to go ahead and write it.
Yeah, the worst thing you had to worry about was the DWM letters page.
Yes, exactly. Or DWB deciding that it was awful, But I recall it got reasonable reviews.
Yeah, I think even now in Goodreads it's sort of getting decent ratings. I always like to look at Goodreads as a sort of barometer of fan opinion. So I
know somewhere I've got all the cuttings that I took out of SFX and things like that at the time when it came out, and I seem to recall that we got a fairly good response to it, as it being a very solid, if obvious, Victorian melodrama horror story. But we sort of wear our influences on our sleeves, Robert and I, and it's a Jack the Ripper story set in Victorian London.
I mean, it's the way that Doctor Who does Victoriana. It's Talons of Weng-Chiang that does the same thing, or even Ghostlight as well. To that extent, you've got these Victorian things you would expect to see, and everything's there that ticks the boxes that you would want.
It's like if you did a Sherlock Holmes story set in Victorian London with the Ripper, you would do it the same way. And in fact, Murder by Decree was a big influence on us.
I did like the whole concept of the dark matrix. I think prefixing anything with dark is going to work. Obviously, Big Finish are doing that at the moment with the Dark Gallifrey. But we don't quite know what it is. But here we have the dark matrix, and great concept.
That's right. So just as, the Doctor is in tune with the Matrix, so the Valeyard's in tune with this, because it is made up of mental patterns. So just as this is all the good and intelligence of the Time Lords, this is all the hate and anger of the Time Lords. So we played an awful lot with that. And the telepathic circuit being the thing that's how he gets in. And then once that's picked up by Jed, that becomes the source of evil, if you like.
And of course, it gets destroyed in a very memorable way as well, which is good. I enjoyed. You mentioned earlier on, just reminding a bit about putting Ace through the ringer, the Doctor threatening her with a shard of glass.
Yes.
Now that's the image that, apart from sort of like in my mind's eye, the Valeyard reveal, and then of Ace being threatened by the Doctor with a piece of glasses. So it's very, very memorable imagery, and I think that's something that in all your books you've always come up with these sort of moments that would just be like there's your cliffhanger.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that Robert and I almost find the cliffhangers and then switch the story around it. But yeah, I knew I wanted that cliffhanger. I really knew that the Doctor pinning Ace down, taunting her, about to cut her throat with a piece of glass, her having a can of nitro and going, if this is it, I'm going to pull the pin. And she does. That's how it ends. She pulls the pin. And then he catches a look of himself and also playing with something that, what I was saying to you earlier about the fact that we could ignore Virgin continuity and however many stories may have taken place in that particular version of Doctor Who. The fact that only a scant couple of weeks before, in our version of the story, Ace had been on the planet of the Cheetah People, to actually use that within her, that she still has this ability to turn into a feral animal stalking the streets of London. That was fun as well, and allowed us to play with that. And to her go, no, I'm effectively a werewolf, so I have to pull this back in. And presenting her situations where she's being so threatened allows all this stuff to come up to the surface. Again, it's very generous of our editors to allow us to go, yeah, other people have played with these tropes and these ideas before, but you don't have to pay lip service to that. Do your own thing. That's very freeing.
Yeah, I'd imagine. Just I've done a quick check there. The Holomen was set between the Curse of Fenric and Survival.
Right.
So all is good. There we go. So that we were correct.
So Robert and I, season 27 run, does indeed run Illegal Alien, Matrix, Storm Harvest, Primetime Heritage or Heritage Primetime, and then Loving the Alien.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. Listeners, work it out for yourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
But it all does fit rather nicely, with Devil's Book in there as well. So I think it's a shame that this never got an audiobook, because I really think Sophie would have had a lot of fun doing this one in the way that she did with Illegal Alien.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, there's this raft of novels out there, both Virgin and BBC Books, that have never had an audio reading at all. I guess because audio books weren't a thing at the time. Plus, I mean, it would be a long book, Matrix. It's a fairly chunky BBC book. Don't know. It's an interesting one. I think it would be a good read. Possibly a little, as you say, a little bleak for your evening commute.
But it all comes good in the end, and there's the wonderful moment about when the Valeyard falls, and then when reality reasserts itself. That's where the TARDIS is, and it's a lovely visual image that it really sort of struck me, that just going back through it again. And
yeah, and all the Doctors effectively mourn the death of one of their own.
Yeah.
And then off they go. And very deliberately, they go on a beach holiday in the next book to get away from all of this, to heal, and of course end up in another adventure. So, and that's where Storm Harvest comes in, which is about as far from Matrix as you could be.
Yeah, I'm not going to do my Krill impression at this point. I'll leave that for the big finish sound effects. But what did you think of the cover? I love the fact there's all these TARDISes sort of been warping around.
Again, a tricky book to try and encapsulate, and Steve was very, very keen. He said that scene at the end is exactly what I want. So it's the dark jacketed Sylvester surrounded by ghostly TARDISes, and yeah, it worked a treat. I mean, I'm very happy with it.
That's where you should be. So, Mike, thank you for that, and we'll be back before I'm too long, I'm sure, to talk about Storm Harvest.
Oh, excellent Krill impression.
Thanks, as always, to Mike, and hopefully he'll be back soon to talk about the next book in this ongoing series which he and Robert Perry were writing. Now, let's hear a second extract from the book further on, when the Doctor and Ace discover who it is that they're facing.
The stairs went deep into the bowels of the Victorian church. The Doctor's impromptu candle barely made an impression on the darkness ahead of him. His shadow, huge and misshapen, lurked on the wall behind him. His progress had been slow. With every step, things had slithered away from him, never seen, never entering the light, always giving suggestions of themselves, but never revealing their true horror. Things from his childhood. Things from nightmares. The doctor had ignored them, concentrating on keeping his footing on the treacherous stone spiral. Slowly, the darkness began to give way. The doctor could see a yellow glow begin to lighten the air before him. The stairs emerged into the crypt. Dark and low, it stretched out before him, its far corners lit by great braziers. The vaulted ceiling dripped with moisture. Things gibbered at him from behind the great stone mausoleums that stood, rank after rank, in the flickering light. The doctor crept slowly between them, brushing dust away from long-forgotten names etched into the marble, resting his palm on each cold tomb before moving on to the next, a solemn procession of death. At the far end of the crypt, swathed in shadows, a tall stone sarcophagus stood silent vigil, the faces carved into it staring out blankly. 13 haunted faces, their expressions contorted into wild leers and snarls. The doctor brushed at the grime and dust. A single name was etched into the stone. The doctor. He pressed himself close to the tomb, his palms flat on the cool marble. He could feel the vibration from deep within. Open up. His lips almost brushed the surface. His voice was little more than a whisper. It's me. With a grinding, protesting thunder of stone on stone, the great marble slabs began to slide like a child's puzzle. Surfaces sliding over each other in impossible patterns until a dark archway formed. Dank, musty air swirled from the void, and the braziers flickered alarmingly. The doctor stepped into his tomb. He emerged into a vast underground chamber. Huge Gothic pillars wound and coiled their way towards the vaulted buttress ceiling, a grotesque, distorted echo of the church crypt. Candles guttered and spat from gargoyled recesses. 5 corridors branched off from the central chamber, long shadows dancing in their depths. The marble floor was alive with a whirling tracery of gold thread, curling in intricate Kabbalistic patterns. The doctor cocked his head on one side. There was a hum, low and throbbing. Familiar, but there was something not quite right, something twisted about the familiarity. He crossed one of the mildewed walls, brushing at the thick cobwebs. Beneath the grime, the doctor could see heavy, round indentations, cracked and crumbling. He nodded grimly. I thought as much. He patted the wall, and holding the candlestick high, stared at the dark corridor stretching away from him. There was a distant chant, not in his head now, but audible. Low and mournful, it drifted from the centre of the 5 corridors. The doctor moved towards it. The patterns on the floor were pulsing in time with the chant. The doctor picked up speed, his footfalls echoing around the walls. The chant began to eat into his head. It was all pervasive, intrusive. It kept time with his hearts. All around he could sense phantoms, beating at him, trying to grind him down. He gritted his teeth and ploughed on. The doors rose sudden and unexpected before him. The light from the telepathic circuit glinted off the beaten metal surface. The symbol of his people, the seal of Rassilon, coiled and twisted before him. He reached out to touch it. The doors slammed open. Behind him, stairs stretched down into a huge amphitheatre. The roof rose higher and higher, vanishing into a haze of candle smoke. Pillars, huge, scarred and rotten, bordered the pentangle on the floor. Robed figures marched in solemn procession, their heads bowed and cowled. The chant, constant, merciless, throbbed from every stone. In the darkness, behind the pillars, shadows boiled and heaved, the blackness alive with demons. A lone figure, brilliant in her stark white robes, lay in the centre of the pentagram, her head lolling. Ace! The doctor's cry echoed around the cavernous hall. The chanting stopped. Every hooded head turned to him, their features shadowed. The doctor bounded down the stairs, skidding across the floor. He crouched at the side of his companion, cradling her head in his lap. Her eyelids fluttered weakly. Doctor? It's all right, Ace. I'm here. He brushed the hair from her eyes. There was a livid bruise on her forehead. How touching. A shadow fell over them. There was a gust of cold air. The doctor laid his companion gently onto the floor and stood, turning to face his tormentor. His voice had the edge of broken glass. All right, I'm here. Now what do you want of me? The cloaked figure chuckled. You've come all this way, and you still don't know, do you? He gestured to the 12 shadow figures that hovered behind him. They've been waiting for you. They've been lonely. The doctor frowned. I don't understand. No, you don't, do you? The figure began to circle now, predatory, his cloak swishing behind him, his voice harsh. You never understood, never realized your destiny, never submitted. The shadows began to hiss and spit. The doctor spun, catching the figure by the arm. Who are you? Never knew yourself. The doctor wrenched back the cowl, thrusting the telepathic circuit forward, illuminating the shadowed features. His face went white. No. Do you recognize me now, Doctor? Yes. The doctor's voice was weary, defeated. You are every dark thought that I have ever had. You were the Valeyard at my trial. You are the Ripper. You are me.
Thank you once again, Dave, and phew, that was a lengthy extract, so thank you for taking the time to do that for us, Mr. Steele. Now it's time to have a look and see what the review said. We'll start with a contemporary review, which was published in Doctor Who magazine, issue 270, when it was reviewed by Dave Owen. Hello Dave, if you're listening. Dave wrote, few single-word titles could evoke so many preconceptions as Matrix. One confidently assumes that the haunting landscape in which the Doctor and Ace find themselves, first trapped in a lighthouse and then pursued across a battlefield, is a simulation within Robert Holmes's Gallifreyan amplified panatropic computer network, and that they will spend the remainder of the novel fighting their virtual opponent and finding their way out. Pah! Such a storyline would be the preserve of such a lumbering vehicle as Star Trek's weary holodeck. Instead, it's merely a prelude to a shockingly imaginative journey through Doctor Who's own formative mythology. When things start going Dali-style pear-shaped for our heroes, the Doctor chooses a safe haven for his companion, taking her to 1963 London, specifically to lodge her with his first incarnation, rather as young married couples leave their babies with their parents. The nightmare which awaits them challenges even Shelf Life's weekends home. History has diverged around the Jack the Ripper murders. London has never recovered from his spectre. The two world wars are subsequently affected, and Kennedy is ripped asunder by a mob of Jackalites on a 1963 visit to a walled London, which has assumed the role of post-war Berlin. This compellingly grim setting is where the Doctor and Ace, we know, must ingratiate themselves with an Ian and Barbara we almost know in order to escape curfew. No book could follow such a perfect scene setting and conjuncture of the television series Alpha and Omega. But Perry and Tucker plough gamely on, taking the Doctor and Ace back to the 1800s, where the problem originated, and where the Doctor disappears from the story, leaving Ace on her own, rather as he did in extraordinarily similar circumstances in the new adventure Birthright, even down to a defunct TARDIS being left abandoned on the banks of the Thames. Ace's subsequent adventures among the down-and-outs of London showcase her character and bravely explore the hitherto ignored area of her infection with the power of the Cheetah People's planet in survival. This realm of gin palaces and rooming houses, all shrouded in smoggy darkness, will delight those, like me, who would have preferred all 14 episodes of The Trial of a Time Lord to resemble its 13th. The 7th Doctor of Virgin's New Adventures was occasionally a more noble and less crumpled figure than Sylvester McCoy's goofy portrayal. Matrix recaptures the television version perfectly, emphasising the performance rather than the words, especially when the Time Lord has lost his memories and identity and is forced to scrape by as an idiot savant, at a loss as to the origin of his abilities. Bereft of the Doctor's verbal baggage, Sylvester McCoy shines through. This is an impressive second novel from a team who had thus far excelled at the vignette, yet not quite mastered the longer form. Unlike their debut novel, Illegal Alien, which had the measured to and froing which characterises a staid missing adventure, this volume has the sparkle and surprise associated with the more groundbreaking new adventures. along with their emphasis on using Ace as the story's focus. Perhaps the price of keeping the concepts fresh and dynamic is that just a week after finishing the book, this reader cannot actually remember its resolution or explanations. But the same might be said of all fast-paced adventure stories, and this does mean that Matrix now joins the tottering pile of Doctor Who books I would like to reread sometime in the mid-21st century. Do you know what? I should probably send Dave a quick message on social media and see if he fancies rereading it now, quoting his own review back to him. Dave's not the only one who's got an opinion on this book, as we pop over to Goodreads now and see what you, the readers, have said about it. Matrix has a rating of 3.44 from 171 ratings, and there's 19 reviews. Of its ratings, it's got 18% 5-star, 4-star reviews are 29%, 3 stars are 35%, 2 stars 11%, and 1 star 5%. And let's have a look at some of the reviews. Jamie gave it a 5-star review. Good old Jamie. Probably not McCrimmon though. Very dark novel. The Seventh Doctor was great at being a manipulator, a clown, and a very troubled man. Highly recommended. Jason Cole also gave it 5 stars. He said, the Doctor and Ace are contemplating life on a seashore when they come under attack from an enemy the Doctor seems to recognise. They escape and decide to regroup in November 1963. The Doctor plans on leaving Ace in the protection of his first incarnation. Unfortunately, the 1963 they land in isn't one they recognise. Britain is now a US state, and the land cowers in fear of something. On meeting 2 wonderful old friends, they discover that history has pivoted around a death just over 60 years earlier, one that shouldn't have taken place. The only way to fix the timeline and hopefully defeat their faceless enemy is to go back to London and stop the 6th killing that shouldn't have happened, and stop the monster that terrifies this alternative world, the monster still known as Jack the Ripper. M. Christopher has given it a 4-star review. M says, probably not James Bond's boss, an original Doctor Who novel featuring the 7th Doctor and Ace. This is a dark, dark tale of the Gallifreyan Wanderer, well written but troubling. It is a fitting sequel to one of the most controversial chapters in the original run of Doctor Who, and lays open the possibilities of the shadow side of Time Lord technology. Published in 1998, Matrix gives us a prescient glimpse into what may have overcome the Time Lords during what we now know as the Time War, forcing the Doctor into his apocalyptic acts in that conflict and prompting his 10th incarnation to return them to their fate. I started reading this on a night when I was looking for light entertainment, which it most definitely is not. I set it aside until a time when the shadows around me were less intense and I could enjoy it properly. I recommend a warm, bright day. There are dragons here and demons and Saucy Jack and any number of other nightmares. The Doctor, Ace and the TARDIS itself are threatened with a possession that will cause them to lose their very selves. Beware, reader, but be comforted as well. The light shone in the darkness, and the darkness could not overcome it. Finally, here's a 3-star review from Daniel Kukwa. Sci-fi loves messing around with Jack the Ripper, and Doctor Who seems to be no exception to this rule. That said, while I think the use of the Ripper in this novel is far superior to both the efforts of Doctor Who and Babylon 5, I do have a hard time wrapping my head around the plot machinations and reasoning. Never mind the massive fanwank involved at its core. What manages to salvage these mind-bending games with evil incarnate is the amount of atmosphere on display. A dark, terrifying Victorian world of madness and murder, far from the usual genteel aspects that Doctor Who tends to explore. It certainly suckers you in and covers up many of the questions one might have about the plot with a pure adrenaline rush. Decent content, but magnificent style. Thank you for that, Daniel. And thank you indeed to everybody who puts reviews on Goodreads, because we do love reading them and seeing what you all say. Remember, you can find us on social media. We're at Power of 3 Pod on Twitter. That's Power of 3 with a number 3. We've got a Facebook page, so come and like us there and you can see bonus content and things like that. And we also have Blue Sky, well, it's my personal one, which is at Finished Zine, FINISHEDZINE. Time is now running out, and it's time to finish up and play out with a tune. And today we're going with one that Okay, this does require probably a little bit of lateral reasoning, one could say. Of course, this book is called Matrix, and there was a well-known film called The Matrix. And one of the tracks on that film's soundtrack is Spybreak by the Propellerheads, who I bloody love. So, any excuse to play some 90s dance. So, here we go. We'll be back very soon. Until then, I've been Kenny Smith. This has been The Power of Three. Bye-bye.